So this is the third video in a series on survival and a sense of purpose. There was a fellow named Rick Warren, I think, that wrote a series of books about purpose-driven life, purpose-driven churches, etc. I don't know that he ever thought about the longevity impact, but there's a lot of research being published out of JAMA this year, 2019, on just that issue. This is going to be on this study that was, I think, published just a couple of weeks ago. Association between life purpose and mortality among U.S. adults older than 50 years. It was a significant size study. They took people that were 50 years and older and participating in a study that's been going on called the Health and Retirement Study. They took about 7,000 of those adults and said, let's give them a survey instrument that's been developed before and used before, which has to do with life purpose. And let's compare that to longevity. Well, it was really clear. In epidemiology, this is what we call a dose-response effect. If you look at the scores on this life purpose test, the higher they scored on the life purpose test, the longer they lived. The guys in yellow were the people that scored the highest. The next level was in green. The next level in blue. The next level in red, and the people with the lowest life purpose scores were in black. Now, what does this mean? This is survival probability. That's in epidemiology, we call this a Kaplan-Meier curve. Whenever someone dies in the cohort, you get a tick down in the curve. So just before we get into the details, if you're one of these folks that wants to see a 30-second summary, that was it. If you're one of those folks, and a lot of people on this channel want to get deeper into the details, we're going to go into the details of that study. But before we do, we'll cover a couple of details of the mini-series that we're doing here. It's on having a life purpose and the impact on your longevity. Now, these are case control studies. These are observational studies. There's no way you're going to be able to do a randomized clinical trial on this issue. Think about it. But there's just been a huge amount of literature around the area, and now the science appears to be catching up. The literature started as far back as the Bible. Ecclesiastes, an elderly King Solomon was starting off with what appeared to be very similar to what Viktor Frankl's concept of the existential vacuum. What does the existential vacuum mean? Well, it comes out in the first phrase of the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanity, all is vanities. The birds. If you haven't heard that, if you're not a Judeo-Christian culture person, you don't know the book of Ecclesiastes, you may know about a separate touch point on this. The birds, way back, I guess the 60s, had a hit song called Turn, Turn, Turn. To everything there's a season. It's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to kill, a time to heal. That's actually just right out of this book, Ecclesiastes 3, 3rd chapter, 1 through 8. So there's a lot of culture and history around what is the meaning of life. But again, there's not been that much science until recently about the interaction between having a meaning of life and longevity. We did another video on this issue with mortality among Holocaust survivors. Sure enough, very strong research signal. The Holocaust survivors were, as you might suspect, much sicker than other people in their same age category. They'd been beaten it was a tough experience, a genocide experience, but they lived longer. So again, maybe that genocide experience was a selection for folks with a strong purpose for life. So let's get back to the health and retirement study, the one that was just published in JAMA. And if you're interested and you haven't seen the Holocaust Survivor, that was also in JAMA as well. But back to the health and retirement study. There's a growing body of literature which indicates that having a strong sense of purpose results in increased physical and mental health and improved quality of life. There are interventions available to influence life purpose. Thus, understanding the association of life purpose with mortality is therefore critical. In other words, we know how to impact people's purpose in life, and if it really does impact longevity, maybe we ought to start considering this issue. So what is the health and retirement study? It's a national cohort, U.S. adults 50 and older. Individuals were born between 31 and 41, enrolled starting in 92. They had a thing called cohort enrichment, which I won't get into. Data analyses were conducted between June 5th, 2018 and April 22nd, 2019. So again, very, very recent study. What were the main outcomes and measures? They looked at all-cause mortality. And I have that over here in pink because I want to remind you, if you haven't seen it, and most people haven't because it wasn't a very popular video, I did a video on all-cause mortality. From an epidemiological science perspective, it is a big deal if you find some determinant of health that actually impacts all-cause mortality. And in short, here's why. Even the number one cause of death, heart attack, causes what, a third or less of death? So if something impacts everything, for example, if something impacted heart attack enough to cause all-cause mortality to change, it would have to have a triple effect on heart attack itself. So all-cause mortality is a big, big bar to reach. They reached it in this study. So that's again, another very strong research signal indicating that a purpose in life is critical. The study's results indicate a stronger purpose in life is associated with decreased mortality. Purposeful living may have health benefits. Future research should focus on evaluating the purpose of life and evaluating tools for that. In addition, understanding potential biological mechanisms through which life purpose may influence health outcomes would also be available. In other words, we've talked so many times on this channel about inflammation. Is purpose in life associated with inflammatory markers? Actually, this study brings that up as a potential mechanism. So, purpose of life, in general, purpose in life can be defined as a self-organizing life aim that stimulates goals, promotes healthy behaviors, and gives meaning to life. Now, I'm going to, again, if you're one of those detailed persons, this discussion is worth reading in detail. Some studies report that those with a strong purpose in life engage in healthy behaviors and have better health outcomes for sleep disturbances, stroke incidents, post-stroke quality of life, depression, and diabetes. In other words, there have been studies on each of these issues. And with those studies, people with a stronger purpose in life do better. They survive strokes better, the sleep disturbances better, have better healthy behaviors. So again, there may be a mechanism here. The association of life purpose and overall mortality has also been explored previously, with Cohen and colleagues carrying out a meta-analysis of 9 prospective studies that examined this association. The studies used a variety of different measures of life purpose, with 6 of the 9 studies relying on a single question. So that gets a little bit difficult to try to rely on in terms of science. For example, in the studies conducted in Japan, participants were asked if they have ikigai. What is ikigai? It's defined as something to live for, the joy and goal of living. The aforementioned meta-analysis showed that compared with individuals with lower life purposes, higher scores on study-specific life purpose scales were associated with survival. So there's been some analysis already. It's not as strong as we'd like it to be, but it all is headed in the same direction. Now, there's a Riff and Keys scales of psychological well-being. There's an assessment in it of the most comprehensive validated scale for measuring purpose in life. It's, as you can see here, lots of references, very well studied. Only 2 of the studies in that meta-analysis that we just discussed use this instrument. Both found associations indicating that individuals with stronger purpose in life had lower all-cause mortality. Furthermore, each of the studies included in the meta-analysis adjusted for things like potentially confounding factors, things like psychological well-being, depression, anxiety, cynical hostility, negative affect, optimism. In other words, social participation. In other words, you might say, well, it's because these people were depressed. Well, no, they took people that were depressed and people that were not depressed, differentiated them based on their purpose for life, and even the people that were depressed but had a better purpose for life still survived better. So life purpose and all-cause mortality. Again, this just gets into more of the same. It gets into some of the details, discussion of the figures. Bottom line, we've covered most of that, and we'll cover some of the figures in just a minute. These numbers, however, though, are the overall summary. Probability is less than 0.001. In other words, the probability of this happening just out of a random chance appears to be about 1 in 1,000. So that would appear to be statistically significant anyway. People that scored higher on the life purpose score were people that survived longer. Bottom line. And you see that here. Higher score. This group on the left is the people that survived longer. And down here, people that were scoring 5s, 32% in the survivor group compared to 16% or 17% in the group that died, and 6% in the people that scored the highest, 6 or 7% compared to only 2%. So again, very statistically significant findings. So discussion, low purpose in life is significantly associated with death among 7,000 older adults participating in the Health and Retirement Survey. The finding was robust to adjustment for psychological well-being. So in other words, in this study, they also did the same thing. They looked at things like depression and said, even within the subgroups of depression, people that don't have great social networks, the people that have a purpose in life are the people that survive. Now, I could go, well, I do want to mention this. I mentioned it before. You ask the question, well, is it all due to, or did these people inherit good genes? Did these people, a friend of mine named Doug, you've seen Doug Thompson on this channel a couple of times. He likes to say, a sick person has only one goal, and that's to get better. Healthy people have hundreds of goals. So is it because you're healthy that you have a better purpose in life? This would indicate maybe not. And clearly the Holocaust Survivor study would indicate not. The Holocaust survivors were sicker, yet they survived longer. So they did look at things like, they've looked at other studies which correlate cortisol levels and pro-inflammatory cytokines. There is evidence to suggest that elevated levels of inflammatory markers, such as C-reactive proteins, cytokines, interleukin-6, are associated with increased mortality. And again, maybe that's a possible mechanism through this has occurred. however, to their knowledge, there's been no life purpose intervention studies that have measured the impact of life intervention, purpose of life intervention, and mortality, let alone going into cytokines and other biomarkers. Again, there's tons of information around this. One thing that you might see is that the age, which you'd expect, the age associated with this. In other words, younger people lived longer. So again, what we're doing here is going through a lot of the details of the study to see if it makes sense. And most of it did. There was one place that didn't make sense to me, though, and we'll cover that in just a minute. Women lived longer. Again, what you'd expect. As I covered just a second ago, younger people lived longer, what you'd expect. Race and ethnicity. In many, many studies, you've seen that race and ethnicity may be a marker for maybe some genetic pool issues, but much less likely to be that. Much more of a lot more evidence indicating that it's an indicator of socioeconomic status. But however, when you look at this this study, race and ethnicity were not significant determinants. Education level was a very significant determinant. In other words, the more education you had, the more likely you were to live longer. People with less than high school education, only 22% in the survival group, 36% in the group that died. Master's of professional degree, 9-10% in the survivors and only 6% in those that died. How about smoking? Well, again, very obvious and exactly what you'd expect. The people that smoked, never smoked, the people that smoked died earlier. The people that never smoked survived longer. How about alcohol? This was an interesting one. People that had had 0 to 4 drinks, 5 drinks per week actually lived longer. You had higher rates among people that survived. So it appeared to be a marker for survival. Chronic illness, again, very obvious and exactly what you'd expect. People that did not have chronic illness were much more likely to be in the survivor group. This is the one that really surprised me, BMI. The people that had the lower BMIs, all the way up to, 29.9, were the people that died earlier. Maybe I'm reading this wrong. Maybe I've gotten confused. Or maybe this is just an issue around the obesity paradox. If you haven't heard of the obesity paradox, Google Ford Brewer Obesity Paradox. You'll find a couple of videos on that issue. So again, very interesting study and a mini-series that I'm really enjoying. I've given this pop quiz, a one-question pop quiz, several times during this series. What's my purpose in life? If you don't know that, go watch some of my other videos. If you have made it this far, thanks for your interest. Have a 2-day event in Louisville, November 8th and 9th. Get your CIMT and all of your labs.